Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hacking with Friends. Today we are fully live and back from vacation, as you can probably tell from Michael's tan and my short hair. And we're happy to do another Q&A, as we were not fully live last week, and we missed you guys. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to drop them in the chat live, and we're also going to go back through some of the comments that were left on our YouTube videos. So if you have any questions that were not answered today, or if you're watching this later on and you want to submit a question for us to answer, make sure to drop them on the YouTube channel, SecurityFWD, because that's where we check these questions every week and make our best effort to answer them, either directly or on the show today. So yeah, man, it was a crazy trip, and we got to meet some of our favorite people, including Nick, Alex, Lynn, and then some new people we'd never met before, such as Zam.
Yay!
Yeah, so last week we did an episode with Alex Lynn, who is also going to be hopefully debuting his first Hack 5 episode. We also got to check back in with Nick, which was really fun, although, man, it was hot in Los Angeles, just not used to that. And then we also got to stop by and see Zam. And Zam did us the favor of giving us a little tracking device and then proceeded to track us all over.
Is it a favor if they're tracking you, though?
All over the country. So with his charming personality, Zam managed to distract us and just planted this one on us and was able to figure out my favorite cafe, where I was staying, and also the exact moment my flight took off, as well as where my layover was and what gate I departed from, all because of this little AirTag.
That's pretty crazy, actually. That's really high-level tracking.
It's pretty crazy. So I am an Android user, as are most of the people in our social group. So this was kind of an experiment to see, hey, is it possible, with no iPhones around you in most cases, except just those of random strangers, to be tracked very precisely? And if I'm a Android user, is there any way for me to detect that I'm being tracked? The answer is no. There was no way for me to detect that I was being tracked. This little thing was traveling with me, and because I don't have an iPhone, it didn't do me the courtesy of notifying me. Now, days later, it finally started making a little chiming sound, but this doesn't really do much good when, for up to 24, 48 hours, I think it's like 48 hours or so, this thing is just kind of off in the wind and tracking its location very precisely. Now, for the purpose of stalking someone or adhering this to the bottom of a car or otherwise being able to see a lot of very fine detail, this is definitely an invasion of privacy and could very easily be abused. I mean, literally all you need to do is go and be within range of it. I think once every 48 hours or something, it might be a little bit less. And provided that you can do that, then this will never issue a notification. And if the person who is being tracked has an Android device, I don't think this really does enough to protect them as someone who has now been tracked by this device. Now, it is interesting to note that within a certain area, there might not be the necessary density of newer iPhones or iPhones that can detect this. So there's kind of a weird little radius where as the population falls off, you can't get as precise tracking. But if you think of every iPhone as a detection tower, then this can actually be tracked very precisely just based on how prevalent iPhones are and how much of a kind of mesh network they make up.
Well, it's also interesting there, too, because it's not like a fixed tower. It's these iPhones roam around, so they actually cover a lot more area than you would think. But anyway, do we want to get started with some of the questions?
Yeah, so if you guys have any, I'm looking into more and more how these work and because I'm very intrigued by this. And yeah, I think looking at the emissions and Wireshark and doing some other work on abusing these or otherwise using them to do some interesting tracking might be in order, because they're a really interesting technology and yeah, very, very sneaky. I would definitely say this is worth maybe coming up with a way of detecting these nearby that's just because as an Android user, this doesn't show up at all. I can't really see it. On Wiggle Wi-Fi, I can detect it, but the MAC address doesn't go back to Apple. It just looks kind of random. So if this is randomizing its MAC address, if it's not a particular manufacturer, then it becomes more difficult to detect these if someone has planted one on or near you. So hopefully there's some better Android warning system for if one of these is traveling with you and it's not yours. Because, it was freaky. You could really just put this in someone's bag or something, and provided you were able to collect it or don't care that it's eventually discovered, you could watch everywhere they go for 48 hours with no warning. So
I was gonna say, how much do those cost? Is
they're
it like cheap enough to be disposable? Is basically my question.
Yeah, I think they're like $50 or something. Like
that's
I might be
expensive.
totally wrong. They were between 30 and $50, I think, like 35 or something like
Because
that.
I was gonna say you could
barely
also
lived.
like interestingly add like sensors to this and then transmit it over the network maybe.
How the hell would you do that? It's a sealed unit.
There were some of the people that were hacking it and sending data that we covered in one of the previous news streams, if you recall.
Yeah. They busted the thing apart and used
Yeah.
like a highly specialized rig to like dump the firmware and reverse engineer it.
Yeah.
You're crazy. Okay. Sorry, I'm like no. But so the advantage of this apparently is that it's $25.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot more.
Yeah, so these are
disposable.
basically disposable. So yeah, I mean, this is apparently end-to-end encrypted, so it's not just broadcasting like in the clear. There's little opportunity for like intercepting while it's kind of like interacting with other iPhones, and the iPhone that reports it is supposed to remain anonymous. There's some other like details of this that I'm still kind of working out, but it's an interesting system. And if you're interested in how phones can be used as a detection network and how little things like this can be detected virtually anywhere, we're going to be trying to do some experiments to kind of test the limits of this, because I was intrigued. And Zam, thank you very much for this tracking device that watches my every movement. Another tracking device that watches my other movement besides my phone and everything else.
8-Bit Oni was asking about other trackers, and I think we'll actually be doing a live stream in the nearest future about these Apple devices, and so we'll cover other trackers maybe a little more in detail there. But you know, cellular GPS trackers are fairly commonly available on like Amazon and stuff like that, but I think they're a little more expensive, and I think also you have to have like a data connection for them or something. I haven't really looked into them as much.
Well, yeah. So
then there's also Tile.
The difference between this tracker and a traditional tracker is you have a beacon-based system versus a like basically a little computer that has a cellular modem that's constantly sending data out. So
Oh no!
with this, you're off-putting all of the work basically to nearby cellular phones. Whereas with the traditional tracker, it would have its own independent connection via its own SIM card basically, and it would communicate directly with whatever tracking service. So this is ingenious because it flips it, and it has the phones do the work of broadcasting, processing the signal, like all this other stuff, and sending their telemetry using their own GPS. This doesn't have to do anything of that sort except just broadcast the same kind of signal and maybe respond to a query. So it's a really interesting technology because you're basically just making beacons that are very almost passive, not exactly passive, but much more passive than these more active trackers, whose battery life can be measured in a couple of days, whereas this I believe is up to like a year or maybe beyond that. So the benefit of having a beacon-based system is it's very simple, it lasts for a super long time, and provided you have millions and millions of cell phones all moving around with GPS connections ready to transmit data, possibly against the will of the owner if they actually knew that this was happening, then there you go. You have a network that's more efficient and can last longer.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, let's go to the first question because we've spent so long.
No, I'm sorry. Like, if you guys are bored of talking about how like this $25 device could track you basically anywhere with no warning, then by all means, let's move on.
Okay, so basically, is it possible to hack someone based purely on knowing their public IP address and only that information?
So let me tell you a dumb story, because I think that somebody else said, what was the most unexpected thing you had done in your whole hacking career? Like, kind of illegal, maybe unaccepted, or maybe dangerous? Well, okay, this is neither illegal, but it was very unexpected. So we did a video on webcams where we were talking about how you could intercept webcam footage, and it was really great. We connected a webcam to our network, and then somehow, I don't know how, somehow it got tunneled to the outside internet. I don't think I did this. Maybe a script that I ran did this, but usually you have to go to the router and configure things. So either somebody else did it, or I don't totally know what happened. But at some point, our router was just hosting that webcam. So if you were to get my IP address, you could just connect to this camera, and you could just full on move it around and look at my yard.
Oh no!
Yeah, and you could see people walking on the street. You could see I guess me come and go from via cars going out of the driveway. I mean, it wasn't the most super interesting view, but it did surprise me because I never did that, and I wouldn't do that because I know that you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, once the camera was connected, maybe one of our other roommates did it or something, or I don't really know what happened, but it shocked me to know that with basically no password, you could just get my IP address, scan it, find out that there was a port 80 or port 81, I think, open, and then just connect to it and just see my front yard.
Yeah,
it almost seems like if I were an attacker and saw that, I'd be like, this is a trap. Like, this is too easy. Like, no.
Yeah, Zam makes a good point, and that's probably the router had UPnP on, or however you are supposed to say that. But I think that's a setting, too, that a lot of people don't know or understand on the router. So they're like, oh, you know, they want things to be easily set up, so they don't really consider all the things that they might be making publicly available. Certainly there's like a level of firewall between your private local network and your public network. So like if you don't have anything already exposed, it's a little less bad, but it's still like if they understand your environment, then they could potentially use that to better threaten you, whatever.
All right, so 8-Bit Oni asked, I wonder how they're able to track those scooters that you might see around that people can rent that just sit on the side of the road. I can't tell you 95% of what I would like to tell you, but let's just say I'm intimately familiar with the way that most of these scooters communicate and the way that these companies go about doing it. It's actually pretty fascinating. So most of these scooters will have a very simple Bluetooth connection that will unlock them. And basically you will interact with a mobile application that will send it a special code, and that code will unlock the particular scooter. But there's also a tracking element. So some of these scooters will have an integrated, like in the actual printed circuit board that controls the rest of the scooter, GPS receiver, and a cellular modem which transmits little bursts of data every so often. Other one, and this means that the giant battery that powers the scooter will actually power this, and usually they have like a backup, little like lithium polymer ion like backup battery glued on the backside that'll last for maybe like another like 12 hours, just in case the scooter really gets lost somewhere and totally powers down. So other ones are not so sophisticated. So in Los Angeles, there's a company called, I think it's Wheels or something, some sit-down, like almost moped-like electric bike kind of company that just uses very standard GPS trackers that are the same kind that are used to monitor like trucking. So these are the kind of stuff that are like maybe tossed in the back of like a freight container or something. They have their own temperature sensors. They can like vibrate and buzz like on command. They're able to, they have an accelerometer, so they know like when they're being bumped and stuff. So they can transmit a ton of data, and they're really expensive, frankly. And they're also not connected to any other battery, so they only last for maybe 2 or 3 days.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, that's what I was going to say. I remember when Lime and other scooters were first coming out, they actually had a problem where the scooters were getting destroyed before they could recoup their costs, at least for a couple of them.
Weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, weird.
I know some of the other ones are also pursuing things similar to either AirTags or using like LoRaWAN. So LoRa is just 900 megahertz signal. So it's not cellular, which is a little cheaper for them.
In the future, though, I think you could expect maybe something like AirTags to be deployed on these, because as I mentioned, the infrastructure is so much cheaper, and if all cell phones are kind of opt-in, or rather, not sorry, opt-out, so they're automatically opted in, and you have to specifically say you don't want to be part of the network, then it makes a lot more economic sense to have a very simple beacon rather than like a whole computer that needs power and a GPS signal and a data line that's probably going to end up in like a lake or like something irretrievable.
The only real question then would be how much data those scooters actually send back home. But then also it would be interesting if they were like war driving on the scooters to see like nearby users and stuff, and then like did targeted advertising towards the people that were nearby or something.
Who knows? But yeah, it's gonna be weird. Let's see. Do we want to do another canned question? I feel bad because sometimes we never get to
You
the questions
never
on
do
YouTube.
them.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, I have a question. What happened to your hair, Cody? This is the first live stream.
Oh yeah, I have a question, Michael. What happened to your hair?
Boom. It's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
It's also messy. That's why it's under a hat.
Yeah,
But-
so we as hackers like to blend into our environment. So in Los Angeles, we found that everyone avoided us when I was wearing like a caterpillar hat with like super long hair in West Hollywood. Zam made some remarks that it was perhaps a little unsettling. So we did decide to, assimilate a little bit while we were there.
We were assimilated into the collective. Okay.
Sure.
So give me a second to read that one. So basically, this guy's having problems doing his SDR chipset on Kali. Do you have any advice?
I mean, can you read the question? I can't see it.
Sorry. Could anyone tell me how to properly install the driver for the RTL 8812AU chipset on Kali? I'm new to this OS and just can't figure it out. Is that a Wi-Fi chipset?
No, it's a SDR chipset.
Yeah.
Get an RTL SDR. They're cheap. They have great documentation. I don't know how to do that. I've stuck to the RTL SDR because it's so easy to use. And sorry, either Google it or get an RTL SDR. They're really cheap. So and the documentation makes it so that you don't need to worry about questions like this.
If you look back in our videos, we have a live stream on SDRs. So if you watch that, that might be a little helpful. But honestly, just if you're getting an error or something, just Google that error. Usually that'll help you.
Yeah, sorry to give you that answer, but like we can't
problem.
answer like exceedingly specific hardware questions like usually, just because like it's so hard to know like what at least we know what operating system you're using, but like it's so hard to know all the little like variables.
Yep. Okay. So next one, how to configure a hidden Wi-Fi network in Blackart using Wi-Fi radar.
Why? Sorry, that triggers me.
I know.
Wait, using what?
Wi-Fi radar. Radar?
I don't know what Wi-Fi radar is. Just don't use hidden
Radar?
hidden Wi-Fi networks. It causes every device that you connect to it to constantly beacon the name of the network until you manually remove it. So if you want to completely screw up all the privacy that your phone is trying to offer you from like automated tracking, then like you will absolutely destroy that if you connect to hidden Wi-Fi networks and then don't delete them later. I don't know what Wi-Fi radar is, but I know that you shouldn't be configuring hidden Wi-Fi networks unless you're like using it for some attacker thing, which I'm not aware of. But
yeah, I was going to say my mom got very paranoid about Wi-Fi security and set up a hidden network, and every Wi-Fi stream we do, like my phone's like screaming out into the void for that network. It's very bad for security.
Okay, so Wi-Fi Radar is an app on Google Play that lets you...
no, it's spelled with an E.
Oh, whatever.
The one he might have misspelled. Anyway.
Yeah, so I've lost
moving on and upward. Okay, here we have a question from Zam. I think it's time for a video on hacking and locking down Home Assistant.
That's not a question.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's a comment that I'm responding to, so you can go, Anyway, we do have that older video on Home Assistant, but yeah, we didn't really focus on locking it down so much. I think we can work on something like that, but it'll probably be a couple weeks before I have time to get that together, because that would probably be a me thing instead of a Cody thing.
It is.
But certainly, you can like enable HTTPS, but you have to use Let's Crypt, which I know sometimes...
Let's Encrypt?
Yeah. People don't always love. I don't know. But yeah, we can definitely get that arranged.
I got a question.
Okay.
How do you capture data from a public Wi-Fi network using Wireshark? You guys want to know? I could do a live stream on it. Basically, we would just need to set up a simulated open Wi-Fi network that does... basically, we just set up a guest network and then show you guys what it looks like to sniff data from an open Wi-Fi network that doesn't have encryption. It's really easy because it's not encrypted.
Done that on the live stream, but I can't remember which one.
I mean, like focusing on guest networks and stuff, I think would be cool. So
okay.
If you guys want to see that, then we can do a couple things. We can do just pure sniffing from a passive perspective, and then we can go in and we can do like DNS spoofing as well. So we can go in and start manipulating the traffic of the open network and start redirecting other people at the coffee shop or whatever to like malicious websites. So if you guys want to see that, please tell me right now, and we'll probably record it. I don't know, maybe later today.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, how to make your PowerShell Empire payload undetectable?
I haven't used PowerShell Empire in a while, and I mean, you would just need to live off the land if possible. Like basically, just use applications to do bad stuff that are you need
already
to have
on the computer.
Yeah, you need to have some Windows like administrator experience to do that, and it would be really helpful because you basically just want to use the built-in tools to do some malicious stuff all the way up until the last second, and then it's too late. So yeah, just like if you're going to be doing, I don't know, like dropping like Meterpreter or something, or like using Metasploit and then just using the standard stuff, like it's probably
You're
going to
gonna
get
get caught.
detected, like unless you do some obfuscation. There's plenty of tools out there for obfuscation, like just look on Kitploit. But I would say like you have two options: either do some sneaky Windows administrator stuff, or use an obfuscator, or just pack it. Just put it in a bunch of different zip files, and that are like, yeah, formatted differently, and like that'll usually do it.
Okay, so what is the toughest thing you've had to learn in your hacking career? Or like what was the most challenging thing for you to learn?
Let's see, networking, I think. Networking makes a lot of logical sense, but there's a lot to it. So programming is math, and some of that was really difficult for me. But networking is like Legos. So like it felt very intuitive to learn in some ways, but also very challenging in terms of like you absolutely can't make mistakes, and if you do,
Everything
there's not
falls
like
apart.
there's like not like a big flashing arrow like in code where it's just like this part of your code is wrong. It's just like I can't access the internet, and it's so frustrating sometimes to not know what's going on. You really have to know debugging, I would say, in networking, like even more than programming, because in a lot of cases, like the IDE that you're working with when you're programming will tell you exactly what's wrong, and kind of baby you along the way. Networking is not always so friendly. It's kind of brutal, and I have a lot of respect for people who learn networking. What
Yeah,
about you?
kind of tangentially to that. Specifically, I remember learning to use pfSense, a really, really steep learning curve, especially since I didn't have any background in networking previous to using it, and then falling down the rabbit hole of all the plugins you can use, because like installing it and just using the basic is super easy, but doing anything else with that, really steep learning curve. So that was probably it for me, although I did struggle with C++ a lot. So certain programming languages are not natural.
So another question was, what was it like coming out to your mom? Easy. Next question was, the course you're offering in CEH, is it beginner friendly? I am not offering a class in CEH, so if you see a class, if you mean like Nullbyte or whatever, they just do their own thing. We have no influence on that. So I have no idea, and I haven't even seen it. So like
We have
because
not, in fact,
they don't
seen that.
ask us. So if that's what you're talking about, certified ethical hacker, like I hear it's very beginner friendly certification. There's plenty of good classes. I just can't recommend a particular one because I had no input on the one that Nullbyte sells. So
That being said, we do have 2 Udemy courses, which you should definitely check out. But anyway,
okay.
well, I thought you didn't want me to go on my spiel.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Pen testing is part of networking. Do you want to elaborate on why you think it's good to learn networking?
Oh yeah, but also queue up another question.
Okay.
So I would say networking is arguably as important or more important than programming for like pen testing and doing actual like red teaming stuff. Just because you're going to be attacking things all the time, and they're on a network. All things tend to be on a network. So if you don't know how to find something, scan something, identify something, troubleshoot a connection, like you're gonna have a very hard time even using automated tools that other people have already made that are super well documented, that'll do your job for you. So nowadays we have so many programs to do the functions of a pen tester. It really, you need to know some networking. You might need to know a tiny bit of like Python or something just to help you out if something's wrong and you need to like fix someone's program that doesn't specifically apply to your situation. But really, with a little bit of knowledge of each, and more of networking, I would say, you really don't need that much special knowledge to use these tools, but understand the whole process, why it's valuable, and what your role in it is. That's really the important part, I think.
Okay. So the next question.
Oh, and asking for links to Udemy courses, hack.gay.
Yes, hack.gay. So this is more just something I want you to respond to in relation to the video you did with Nick last Friday. If you don't think Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, etc. aren't listening to you and the keywords, then you're kidding yourself. Obviously, don't use those apps or monitor packets and rid your system through programs.
Okay, So when we talk about tracking, there was a really good thread on Twitter that was talking about how data is aggregated and people that you are near, your data is basically combined with their data because advertisers are aware that you are in each other's presence for an extended period of time. This is creepy, but also lends people to think that their conversations are being recorded because they might talk about something that they use or whatever else, and then the other person might be served an ad because they're spending time together, and they're like, well, we said the word this type of pizza out loud, but maybe you put your phone number into your value card at the grocery store and you buy that pizza all the time. So, the advertisers already know that you love that pizza and they're going to serve up an ad for that pizza to the person that you're hanging out with because, they just want somebody to bring up that pizza because they know you'll probably purchase it. Like this sort of thing freaks people out all the time and makes them feel like their audio is being recorded. But as we mentioned with Nick, like this is difficult. It would take up a lot of battery power. It would take up a lot of transmitting power. It also just isn't necessary. It's an excessive amount of data. So no, in most cases, these apps are not recording your conversations. Unless
you say like, okay, Google.
Don't. Please.
Google.
We're littered with Android devices that are trying, desperate to respond. Yeah.
But if you say
for the sake of all of our subscribers, please also do not trigger devices or try to make purchases on Alexa or whatever.
Okay, computer, buy everything on it.
Thanks. All right. So yeah, I would just say, it is easy to think that your conversations are being recorded and whatnot, but there's very little evidence of this. It's in fact easier for them to just combine all the data points that you've already put out there through random rewards, clubs points, and whatever else, and then build a picture of you that way, and then serve it up to people you might be spending time with.
Okay. Can you explain the differences between bug bounty and pen testing and reverse engineering?
Yeah. So bug bounties are typically programs you can sign up for where in your spare time or for your primary job, you can attack these websites or services and figure out what's wrong with them in exchange for cash. This is prearranged. It's all by the book, and typically anybody can join provided they have the ability to get paid by Bugcrowd or Hackeroni or whatever, and also have a track record of, doing good in the community and finding these bugs and stuff. So I think this is not my field. I don't really do bug bounties, but a lot of people do. They're a good way to make money when you're just getting started because you don't need to have excessive credentials. You can just be talented at this and make a good amount of cash. There's also a lot of competitions, hackathons and stuff that focus on this sort of skill. So as a beginner, this is probably the most accessible and easiest way to get started with hacking. Pen testing is actually a specialized job where a company would hire you or you would be hired by a firm that is then hired by other companies to go in and test things more extensively with some restrictions. So, this would be a one-time test that basically tries to break in as hard as possible and simulates usually a medium level skill of attacker. Although if someone really pays a lot, then they can, get it ranked up to someone who's really good and really test their system. The last one was Red Team.
They said reverse engineering.
Oh, well, all right. And then reverse engineering would be an analyst. So reverse engineers would work with law enforcement, private companies, or just cybersecurity companies in general to find samples of malware and basically figure out what they do by dissecting them. So this requires more computer science knowledge. It's more specialized, and in general,
I would say it's a little more reactive too, because generally. Pen testing is something you would do proactively before a breach. Bug bounty would be something you do before or after. Maybe a breach triggers you to make a bug bounty program. Reverse engineering is typically going to be something you do after you already had an attack. It may not have been a successful attack, but you want to understand what happened.
Right, and plenty of people also will plenty of companies will put up honeypots so that they can try to capture and intercept this malware, let it execute as fully as possible, and just understand what it does, because it gives defenders a better understanding of how to protect companies and what attackers are trying. So it's a constant cat and mouse games, and these reverse engineers are really kind of on the front lines of figuring out what attackers are trying so that everybody else can basically emulate it so that companies can be protected. So I hope that answered your question. But they're all very different roles. All of them are in cybersecurity. I am none of them, which is interesting because I do, obviously, the show.
Educator.
Yeah, communication. I also do demos. I do write my own tools. But,
it's interesting that you say that because that's our next question.
Oh. Well, all right, go on.
Does using someone else's tools make you less of a hacker?
That's a good question. The answer is no. But if you go your entire life without feeling like you're missing out on something by learning a little bit of programming, then I would say you might not have hacker instincts. So I started out not knowing how to modify any of the programs I was using. They all needed extensive documentation, but I was still able to bridge the gap between other beginners and people who were really experienced because there wasn't a lot of good information there. I was also able to realize that there's lots of people that just know a little bit of networking and then how to use these tools. I would say like you cannot get away with this without learning a little bit of networking, unfortunately. Like if you try to just use other people's tools and you have no idea like what an IP range is or how to do a scan or any of that stuff, like it's going to be difficult, much more difficult than it really needs to be because networking is not that hard. Like anybody can learn it. It just takes a little bit of effort to get the fundamentals down. But once you do, then using other people's tools, you could go your entire career. Now that being said, like if you want to write your own tools, if you want to modify tools, learning a little bit of Python is a really good idea because you don't need to be a computer science genius to write a Python tool that connects to an API of a data source and makes a simple search program. So I love to find open source data sources and then write a very simple little Python search tool for them. So for example, if you want to query the city of Los Angeles for a specific business record, I've written a couple tools that will allow you to find like any restaurant with a liquor license in Los Angeles so you can locate information about them. That's because I do a lot of business OSINT and I did it so much that while I love these data sources, it's not very friendly for other people to use. So I like to just make it a little bit better than I found it and write a little interface for people to use to access the data. And again, this is a very, very simple Python program. I've had a year or less of Python. So, you know, like I think that you don't really need to know that much to take the extra step of writing your own programs or modifying an existing program. But, you know, if you don't have time to do that right now, just learn a tiny bit of networking and you could have an entire career in cybersecurity without needing to worry about, you know, programming anything.
Okay, so if you had to choose one tool to hack a computer.
Which computer?
Let's just say a Windows computer.
Okay.
You have a Windows computer. You can choose one tool. What would be your go-to tool?
Hack it to do what?
They just said exploit. So
exploit it to do what?
Yeah.
Ransomware it? Destroy it? If I'm just trying to destroy the computer, I would say the USB killer.
Oh, that
just jumped like a ton of voltage directly into the motherboard.
Yeah.
Hacked. No one will ever access that computer again. But I mean, if you've got a specific, like you want to establish a reverse shell on it and then like control it like a puppet, if you want to like steal all the files, if you want to ransomware the file, I mean, you got to be a little bit more specific. That's the problem with answering some questions is I want to answer your question. I just, the answer changes. If you're talking about like, how do I hack a Raspberry Pi? It's like, probably, I don't know, probably another Raspberry Pi. But, you know.
Log in with the default credentials. That's how you hack a Raspberry Pi.
Weren't you rocking the long hair last week? Yes, I went to Los Angeles and it was too hot. It was too hot.
It was a little spicy there.
In the 90s at some places. So I had to lose that because I felt like I had like a scarf on all the time.
I heard that cybersecurity pays less and they have toxic community. What do you think?
Hey, well, my question is pays less than what? Because I would say if you are a developer, but then you can tack like cybersecurity on your title in any way, shape, or form, you will get paid more. So if you have a IT peripheral job and then can like tack the word security onto it, in most cases you will, if your work is fair, you should get paid more. Now, if you're comparing it to like another job that makes an absolute ton of money, I mean, it's not. It depends on the job. Like obviously, I kind of mentioned how like a reverse engineer versus a pen tester versus somebody else like might all make completely different salaries. One of them might be seen as an IT person. Another one might be seen as an analyst. Like those are totally different jobs with totally different pay scales. So when it comes to the toxic community, I would say the professional cybersecurity community is still the most punk group of people in a professional environment that I've ever seen. And they value diversity, and there are groups that are really, really good within them. It is still overwhelmingly male. There are definitely toxic people in the community who are never reprimanded or don't seem to face any consequences.
Lots of gatekeeping.
And you will find lots of gatekeeping and people who are very unhappy, I think, with the position they've ended up with, and are very defensive about how the right way to learn is, and whether or not you're cut out for cybersecurity based on their standards. And they can be probably some of the reason why we don't have a lot of diverse talent in cybersecurity when we need it. So you will see diverse people in cybersecurity, but the statistics still show that there's a really long way to go. So, I mean, unfortunately, it is tougher than some careers that might be more open to everyone and have less of those gatekeepers and those who are like out there to try to make people feel like they don't measure up. But I'm here to tell you, like, anybody can do this job if you're determined to do it. It just might not always be made to feel that way, because I'm terrible at math. I have like 2 years of programming experience in, like off and on in C++ and Python, and I still write my own tools. I'm part of the community. I do talks at conferences, and I try to contribute as much as I can. So, there is still a long way to go. So you've got some points, but I still think you'll typically make more in cybersecurity than you will in comparable fields that aren't cybersecurity related, but could have that tacked on. And I think that the cybersecurity community is certainly better than I've worked in startups, so I know what the tech startup community is like. I will say cybersecurity is better than that.
Nice. Yeah, and also if you need a little inspiration, like check out our Hack 5 video on people coming from different careers to cybersecurity, like just kind of reading into the question a little, like maybe if you're going to college or thinking about like getting a degree or something, like you can get a bit more general degree, like, programming or whatever, and then you can take a lot of ways. Like in your career, you can change careers midway through.
This is such a good question. I have to answer this. Would you ever work for a private military type company, like a government contractor? So that is personally just my opinion, not the opinion of anyone else.
To you?
That is like way too not punk for me. I would not like that. But actually, that question depends on whether or not we're at war with China, because then maybe yes. I don't know, depending on what's happening. At the moment, no. I really have been told my entire life that people like me are not welcome in the government and military. So, like, now that I'm valuable, like having them like snipe me seems a little late, because I've been welcomed in the private sector, and I've really found myself here. Plenty of people find themselves in the government as well. I just think that I like to be me. So, Michael though absolutely would.
Yeah, no, I wanted to do that.
Sign him up, Raytheon.
Yeah.
Go get him, Booz Allen.
Yeah, no, y'all want to give me a 6-figure salary? I'm all here. Okay.
Yeah, Michael, not concerned with being punk. Me, I have a specific reason for why I like teaching hacking, and I'm not sure if blowing people up has anything to do with that.
Okay, on that chipper note, what's a good program or tool for Wi-Fi cracking?
There's so many. I mean, really, WPS Pixie should always be your first choice. If you are able to find a network with a vulnerable version of WPS, there's no point in using other hacking tools. So I would say Airgeddon is probably the most straightforward way to just install most Wi-Fi cracking tools and go through them one by one. Airgeddon has them all. You can start with WPS Pixie, move on to some of the other attacks, and then if it's really resistant to cracking, you can just do a social engineering attack and try to get them to give you the password. It's very audacious, but it tends to work. So I would say it's kind of like a 3-step process. First, you try the WPS Pixie, see if it's vulnerable. That'll take 30 seconds if the router's vulnerable. If it's not, then you move on to a weak Wi-Fi password. You could grab the handshake and then try to crack it. If you get through a billion passwords and it's not on the list, then you're like, oh, damn, well, all right, now I've racked up $1 in my AWS instance and I don't have the password. Then you move on to just creating a fake access point that looks like their access point, blocking their real connection so they can't connect to their regular Wi-Fi, and hoping they get frustrated enough to be tricked into thinking the router's doing an update that requires their Wi-Fi password. Believe it or not, this has actually worked on me before, back when I worked in tech and not when I worked in cybersecurity. So this is a tactic that works. But yeah, it's kind of that 3-step process, and Airgeddon has all 3 tools, all 3 strategies kind of put into the same interface, so you can go through them really quickly.
Okay, and kind of related to that, how does one learn about current Wi-Fi exploits and how to utilize them?
Read papers by Matthew Van Hoff. He is the best Wi-Fi expert that I know of. He does proof of concepts. He's very responsive to questions. And in general, like most of the Wi-Fi news that you see is from his research. Also, his exploits, or the exploits he discovers, tend to, well, I guess the bugs he discover, I should be clear, tend to be exploitable across like billions of devices. It's crazy because these are flaws in Wi-Fi itself or in the implementation of Wi-Fi. So you can read his research papers for free on his website. I'll try to drop the link in the chat. But yeah, in general, I would say Matthew's probably at the forefront of Wi-Fi research, and reading his papers is how I specifically modified a couple of Spacehoon's devices to unmask devices that were using MAC address randomization and do some more advanced stuff with Wi-Fi than I even thought was possible. So pretty amazing stuff. His papers are really easy to read. Even if you don't know much about Wi-Fi, he explains it along the way. So I know a little bit about networking, and that certainly helped. But even if you didn't, most of his papers are very, very accessible for beginners, and I really like them. So I'll drop that in the chat.
Okay, and related to that again is, how do you deal with information overload? There seems to be so much to learn.
I'll let you answer that one.
Honestly, like for me, I just tend to get like really interested in a specific topic, and I will just ignore everything else and just dive super deep and spend a lot of time researching that particular topic until I feel like I understand it well enough, and then I move on to something else. That may not be like the best strategy for everyone. There are certainly sources of information that will try to help you filter through to some degree. Like in the context of like finding the best hacking tool on GitHub, you can always filter by how many stars it has and how recently it's been updated, and just develop your own strategy for the types of things that you're doing and what makes sense for you. I know that's a bit of an open-ended, ambiguous answer, but that's about the best I got for you.
Yeah, I would say for me, I am just focused on specific parts of cybersecurity, and I kind of ignore. There's so much stuff on like reverse engineering and like bug bounty things and web application vulnerabilities that just don't really apply to my expertise. So for me, it's easier to just ignore things that I'm not obsessed with and focus on being a specialist with the things I really do care about and engaging with that. Because cybersecurity is so big, you will never be able to learn all the stuff out there. You'll never be able to be, or at least I would think you would be exhausted trying to be like a bug bounty person and a reverse engineer and a pen tester and also someone that writes their own. Like that just sounds like a crazy amount of work. But I mean, it's nice to be well-rounded if that's what you want to be. It's just like, it's better in some cases to be a specialist and just focus on knowing the things that you really are motivated to learn about and seek out information for.
That's why like pen testing teams exist, right? Like you have a team of people where each of them specialize. And that's also why a lot of these hacks you hear about, certainly some of them could be attributed to one individual, but a lot of them are groups of hackers, right? Because if, one person is really good at compromising the system and then the other one's really good at like doing an exploit on that system, writing ransomware, something like that, like you combine those skill sets.
You guys have such good questions this week. One of them that I like that was actually kind of asked and answered was, what do you think of SCADA systems hacking? And then Andre said, SCADA hacking is really hard to get into since everything is proprietary and the software found on these devices is not publicly found too easily. And that's absolutely true. SCADA hacking is basically industrial system hacking. These are the kinds of things where you hear very famous examples of with Stuxnet, where it's basically something that's programmed to damage or destroy or override the system that it is controlling. And this requires in-depth knowledge of the target, exactly what version of the software they're running, and basically also the ability to exploit this very proprietary system that is generally not available to the public. So it's very difficult to get into, but it's a very hot topic right now because nation states are able to just probably just order the equipment themselves, get the reverse engineer the firmware, and figure out like exactly what to do with it. So it's something that requires a big budget typically, because if you don't have access to the equipment that you're trying to hack, it's very difficult to know exactly what they're running. And
then also you're going to get into like expensive reverse engineering equipment and stuff like that too, depending on like what you're doing. If you're if you're hacking physical hardware, you need to have like a controller, so you know how that controller is going to react to different things, and so you can fuzz it. And
this is a great question. Best tool you use for ransomware? Low orbit ion cannon. Enjoy.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't think we can seriously give you recommendations on which ransomware program to use. Do you mean like to? No, your question very clearly doesn't mean to protect against ransomware.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. You might be shocked by this, but my daily job actually does not involve me ransomwaring computers, and I highly suggest that yours doesn't either.
Yeah.
Anyway,
crime doesn't pay. Have you guys considered doing anything related to deep fakes? Social engineering attacks are only growing, and I'm sure in the next decade, deep fakes will be used more and more for social engineering attacks.
What? Sorry, I was reading the chat.
Deep fakes in relation to social engineering.
So there's this account I follow on TikTok that's like a deep fake of Tom Cruise. Okay. And like I cannot tell if it's like a lookalike or if it's a deep fake. It's getting to the point where like no one can tell. I don't know a lot about the technology behind it because I haven't specifically studied it, but maybe we could get an expert on and do something on it because I'm really interested and I would love to learn more about it, but it always requires a little bit more computer science knowledge than I have to dump into a project that takes more than a day to set up.
Yeah. Okay. This guy is saying, I'm a 3-year senior network engineer with Security Plus and expired CCNA root switch. What position would you recommend I aim to apply for? Network defender or security analyst?
I mean, frankly, either one. It depends on what you want to be doing and who you want to be interacting with. So, as a security analyst, you're probably going to be dealing with like higher level stuff, maybe even for a company that specializes in analyzing stuff for larger companies.
Something else I might suggest with the analyst route is kind of analyze whether you're going to be needing to write a lot of reports or give a lot of presentations in relation to that job. Is that something you want to be doing? That's also something you might consider there.
Manchad, I'm sorry, I don't know about the French bias exploit with M1 Max, but I'm gonna Google it, and then by the time we're live Friday, hopefully we'll be able to do something on it.
This one's a little ambiguous, so interpret it however you want.
All right.
How ransomware spread over network?
Oh, okay. So there's what's called wormable ransomware. I'm assuming that's what this question is about. And what that does is it's ransomware that has modules built in that allows it to move laterally throughout the network. So it will scan for other things that the current user has access to, and it will try to propagate across the local area network. But also, there are some really cool ones that are Wi-Fi wormable. They're usually like IoT things. So what these will do is they will not only infect the device, but then they will try to find other devices in Wi-Fi range and then connect to them and use default credentials or other ways of breaking into the Wi-Fi network to then take over another device. And that can propagate amongst a bunch of vulnerable Wi-Fi devices. Maybe someone has a network of Wi-Fi cameras. Even if they're actually disconnected from each other, they could still detect each other, and then one of them could infect the other, could infect the other, could infect the other. So there's multiple different ways where these worms can spread. Usually, again, it's through vulnerable configurations of IoT devices is where you tend to see like Wi-Fi worms, but network worms, where once it's on your computer, can connect to any like network shares or anything like that, are very, very common. And typically just rely on automating built-in tools to scan for and connect to shares and do something damaging.
Okay. What cybersecurity companies are doing really interesting and innovative things in your opinion? I wonder. There might be a company that does some very interesting things.
What were you highlighting?
Varonis.
Yeah, but what were you bracketing with your hands?
Oh, I was trying to point down to the Varonis sponsored logo.
Oh, right. Okay. Because it was like you've got like a hacker house. I thought you were pointing at something like
oh
on
no,
your
not
computer.
the stickers.
Or in your shirt's also not Varonis. So, but you were wearing a Varonis hat,
I am,
so I thought you were going to go with
hat.
the Varonis hat. But yeah, well, okay, aside from the bootlicking, like, I think Rapid7 obviously does cool stuff. I've spoken to people at Rapid7 at conferences. They always seem to really like their job. And also they develop, they do Metasploit and some other cool stuff. Maltego is a company we've been working with, and they have recently come under new ownership. Like we met the original dudes from South Africa that made it, and then it was purchased by a German company, and we know a bunch of the people who work there because they're also part of the hacker community. Like they took me to the C3, the Chaos Communication Congress, and then various hacker spaces in Munich. Like they're very involved in the community, which I really like to see. So, any company I think that is listening to the community and part of it and working on tools that people really want and are asking for, I think is great. And those two companies kind of stand out to me. Yeah, I think that those are the ones I kind of rattle off the top of my head. But, I'll think about it some more. Canary token. Thinks Canary. So Thinks Canary also has some really cool free honeypots that I use myself just to be able to track links and stuff like that. And I really appreciate their focus on providing resources for free to the community. And again, like everyone that works there just seems like really cool and happy, and just kind of a nice sign to see like people involved in the community making tools for the community while also making money. So yeah.
Okay, and we're running out of time, so if y'all have any last minute questions, be sure to drop those in the chat. So one I would have ready for you, Cody, is how do hackers bypass logins?
Logins for what?
That's a good question. They didn't provide that, so I'm just going to say like generic, say like on a computer, you might use, could you use a Wi-Fi duck to like brute force a login?
I suppose. Basically, your options are online or offline cracking, typically for that sort of thing. If you want to do online cracking, that's brute forcing and hoping that they don't have any rate limiter, and you just try a whole bunch of times automatically by using a tool, I don't know, like Hydra or something.
Yeah.
And then the opposite of that would be, getting a hash and then decrypting it to get the password. There's multiple ways you can do it, usually by intercepting like a hash for the password, like in Wi-Fi cracking. That would be one example of offline cracking of a login. So multiple different ways of doing it. Rate limiting is really kind of the bummer on this, and of course there's also
two-factor.
But there are ways around this. It just depends on the specific circumstance and gets kind of like more specific as you get deeper into any scenario.
And the lowest hanging fruit there also is when people reuse credentials. So if they've been in a breach before, something that would be very common is if you're not targeting a specific individual, then you might just take some of those data breaches, input all those user and password combinations, and see if you get someone.
So somebody asked about Airify. This is a paper that goes over how attackers could use. It's really interesting. It could use built-in hardware to basically.
Should I share your screen?
No.
Okay.
To create Wi-Fi signals. Yeah, this paper is like for pay. So like if I find a free version, I'll.
Fun fact: if you ever are having trouble getting access to a paper, just email some of the authors on them, and they'll give it to you for free.
Typically, or like Matthew Van Hoff, they'll just have a website that hosts all of it for free. So
that also is very common.
Yeah. So I'm currently loading this paper, but I have not read it. But basically, what it claims to do is be able to exfiltrate data from air-gapped computers. Actually, you can go ahead and go to my screen. So this is the paper if you want to check it out. It actually is free from Cornell, so I wouldn't have recommended it if it wasn't. But you can go through it. I have no idea how beginner-friendly this is, because again, I haven't read this yet. But just like thumbing through it, it looks pretty cool. I just don't know if you can do a proof of concept yourself, or if it's one of those things where they're like holding it back because it's too cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like anything that is a paper has at least a certain level of like you have to get past like actually sitting down and reading all the paper.
Yeah, and just
stuff.
like from context clues and the title, I can see that this is like one-directional communication, because look, it says generating covert Wi-Fi signals from air-gapped computers.
Yeah.
So like that's just, you're not communicating with it, you're receiving communications from it. So like, it's really interesting. Air-gapped stuff is always interesting. Using hardware to do new stuff is always super interesting, but this does not appear to be bidirectional communication. So there is a little bit of a limitation there.
Can you
away from my screen.
Can you quickly explain what two-factor is?
Two-factor authentication means what are the three things of a login?
Something that you know, something you have, and something you are.
Yeah. So like
something you are would be like a fingerprint, iris scan, palm vein scanner. Something you know would be a password, and something you have would be like a USB key or commonly your cell phone. So when a website sends a code to your phone, they're checking something that you have. Ideally, you would use all three of those, although most two-factor only uses like a cell phone. It's better than nothing, but it certainly has flaws as well. So like if you have a very if your account is highly targeted, let's say, then they might perform a SIM swap attack where they order a new phone or a new SIM card from your cellular provider, put that in a new phone, and then suddenly they are your phone number. So they receive the text from the website, and then they use that code. So that's why you preferably use all three.
Yeah. I mean, and really the best thing to use is if you have like one of the USB based, and Zam can attest to this, if you have one of the USB based ones, then you can use that as just to make sure that your password is useless, because there are attacks that make it so if you are targeted specifically, they can bypass it. I've heard of some absolutely ingenious attacks that these companies that are supposed to be safeguarding like your cellular contract and other stuff like that just are not going to anticipate. I heard of one attack where somebody kept calling back and correcting a single character misspelling over and over and over until they completely changed the name on the account, because they kept getting different customer service representatives.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so like they're just like sometimes you would just never expect it. Depending on the amount of effort someone puts in, they probably could get around the kind of two-factor authentication that just relies on a phone. And frankly, another thing to remember is that if you set up two-factor authentication and both of them go to the same device, like your login and your two-factor like goes to like a Google Voice account or something that's like connected to your computer and you're just on the same device, that's not really two-factor confirmation. It's more cheating. So like, yeah, just realize it's really easy to mess up 2FA, but at the same time, it's essential, and you absolutely should do it, because not having 2FA means anytime your password gets breached,
well, and the sad thing too is it is a minor inconvenience, and that provides too much of a hurdle sometimes for a lot of users. So, it is definitely something every website should implement, particularly like, cryptocurrency websites, banking websites, anything that healthcare websites, anything that has very valuable information. Also I see it very commonly used on like games, because people get their game accounts hacked all the time. But we are out of time. So do you have any closing thoughts, any remarks you want to make?
No, thank you guys for the suggestion. I think we know what we're going to do for a networking episode on attacking like public Wi-Fi networks. Now Michael just has to configure a guest network for us to attack. Thanks,
Why
everyone.
do you all do this to me? Wi-Fi episodes always involve so much blurring that...
Oh, yeah, Wi-Fi. Sorry, guys. Wi-Fi episodes, we have to blur our MAC addresses, so there's going to be a little bit of blurring, but we'll do it. So we'll set up a test like coffee shop network that's unencrypted, and then we'll both look at it from the outside and then break in and see what we can see when we're being stealthy versus what we can do when we want to be loud. So, yeah, that'll be a fun video. Damn, Zam has managed to be in the chat helping out this entire episode while in the shower, so congratulations. Obviously his shower computer is working a lot better than mine, despite my best efforts. It's great to be back. We will see you guys again. We're not on Friday? Yeah?
We're gonna be streaming tomorrow. We flip-flopped the Q&A today and the pre-recorded stream tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be the pre-recorded stream, and then we'll be live on Friday with news.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and just a little advisory out there for everyone. Watch for deer.
Yes, deer.
Yeah, we are -1 car thanks to a deer strike. So when we say watch for deer, it's not a suggestion. All right, everyone. You take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.